I'm Guy McLean. I'm the director of the Westfield Athenaeum, and we're really excited to be here today in the studio with Laura Radwell in her studio here in East Hampton. We're so excited because we're about to have a great exhibit of her work at the Rand Gallery in the Athenaeum. And so today we thought we would talk about some of the paintings and give a kind of a preview of what we are going to be showing in the museum. It seems like you put down kind of a layer of color and then you do gestures. That's one question I have. And then secondly, how much editing do you do as you go through the process? Do you kind of go with the spontaneous feeling and try to stay with that? Or do you go back and do a lot of fixing later on?
Yes to everything.
Yes to
I do start with a background of color. I'm often tempted to try white, but it never really works out. It doesn't feel rich enough to me. But I then, the first thing I do on this field of color is gesture. And that is spontaneous. And that is not trying to represent anything in particular. It's just lines and shapes and color.
And what do you think generates the gestures? Because they seem to me very spontaneous. And so I just wonder if there's something that you feel, that generates those.
I would venture to guess that at this point in my life, after X number of decades of living, there's a lot of things that are in me that have not had a way to come out. And I'm in a moment where I can do whatever I want, and it doesn't matter what it is. And then I can take it to the next stage, which is then more intentional and happens with other materials. And then I get to a first layer. So the first layer sometimes survives more intact than at other times. It depends on all the factors in that moment. But if it doesn't survive, it's an underpainting, it's a first layer, and then I come back whenever I come back to it, and I might reapply some gestural marks and moves to it, and then I paint again. So every decision after those initial gestures is intentional. And
do you work on a painting for a while and then put it aside and then come back to it later? Do you do several paintings at a time, or do you work on just one painting at a time?
No, I work on several most often, and some of them pop out and they are sort of complete in a relatively short amount of time. I mean, that doesn't mean 5 minutes. That means, in a session or two, the momentum is very strong, and so they are coming from somewhere. And then others are mysteries, and the first layer happens, the second layer happens. I might put it away for a few months and go back to it and say, oh yeah, what about that painting? I really didn't like it. And that feeling gives me freedom as well to just, again, find some new spontaneity.
Yes. I'm noticing that this is a very interesting painting for me, and it seems a little different than the previous work you've done, in that most of your gestures tend to be very lyrical, but here it seems like there's kind of scratch marks that are more kind of straight and more kind of angled here. Can you tell us, I'm just curious about how you approach this painting in contrast to some of your other work. Was it just an emotional response or something else?
I think it was to add a little juxtaposition to the sweetness of the color. The color palette is sweet, it's pink, has a little orange, it has purple, and we didn't dress to match this painting, really. We did not.
It just worked out that way.
It just happened. But I think that I wanted to counteract the possible perception that, oh, it's just so pink and so sweet. I love the pinks and I love the oranges and I love the different colors that I've added on the bottom, but it needed some energy. It needed something to upset it.
Yes. A contrast, yeah. That's something that I think artists have to think a lot about is you can't go with one kind of thing too much. There needs to be some contrast, right? And I can see how this works very successfully, I think. It does offer a little tension and a little contrast there. Yeah, I really like this because it has a little difference like that. And I think the contrast is one of the things that makes it so interesting.
As the gesture is important in this group of paintings, of which there are a couple more actually, but I did these when I was at an artist residency in France.
Yes.
And I was feeling, well, first of all, the countryside was magnificent, absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
And I was feeling very loose and open, and I felt like I had access to places that, under more normal circumstances, are not available to me. So I really felt like I was dancing across the canvases. And, you know, I loved being able to use mixed media to have these touches that, well, what are they or what do they mean? And I'm not going to explain them for anyone because it doesn't
Sure.
matter what I think. You know,
Yes.
what really matters is the experience of the person looking at them.
Right,
But-
right. And that's the beauty of this kind of work is you certainly bring a certain kind of emotional content to the work, but yet it allows a lot of room for the viewer to bring their own vision to as well, it seems to me. And one question I have about these compared say to this painting, these have a kind of a darker background, it seems, whereas this seems kind of intensely bright. Was there some kind of aspect of that you were exploring that brought out kind of a darker quality? Because I think it's very interesting to use kind of this darker background.
I was exploring the difference in my process. So my process usually is to begin with a color that is more toward the lighter end of the spectrum and the brighter end of the spectrum. And I thought, well, what would happen, because here I was in a place where I had no constraints, what would happen if I just flipped that on its head and I started with a dark background? And so yes, that's why these are different. And now I find it's very useful to add to my process because it gives me a greater range with which to express my feelings, emotions, and thoughts. Because if I'm thinking about election results or the direction that the country's headed, I'm not feeling yellow and orange and pink and bright. I'm feeling concern. I'm feeling like I can't represent my feelings or my thoughts with bright colors like that. So I use a different process.
Yes, and I think this gets to the idea of spontaneity. You know, it seems like to me one of the things that artists do is that they must explore. They must sometimes try new things and see how they work. And it seems like to me there's a real range of exploration here where you just tried something to see if it gelled and came together, because it seemed like look at the range of colors and gestures that you have here. Do you feel that spontaneity is something that you work with every day? Because that's my guess is that's the case. But how do you feel about
that? Absolutely right. Because I walk around with a lot of ideas for paintings, and when I come to the studio and it's a day for painting, which not every day is, something rises to the surface, you know, one of those directions or one of those thoughts, and it usually combines with some color mood that I'm in. So I don't always feel like painting pink and red and orange and purple. I feel like painting blue and green or black and orange, and so those things spontaneously come together in that moment when I'm in front of the canvas. And I know the color direction that I want to take, and I kind of have a subject in mind, and then I go to my gestures, the spontaneous gestures, and with a variety of materials, whether it's oil sticks or pencil or charcoal or crayon, I just draw things on the canvas, but not things that will necessarily survive in the final result, but just feelings.
I'm really intrigued with these small works. You've put together a series of small works for the exhibit, and they're just really beautiful. Can you tell us something about, because they seemed a little different than the other paintings, the larger paintings. Can you tell us about how they're different and how you approach these paintings?
Well, this body of work came into being thanks to, in part, my son, who is an architect in Berlin, took out an iPad and showed me the software called Procreate, which replicates every possible artistic gesture and medium that you could imagine. Watercolor, gouache, oil painting, different kinds of brushes, different diameter of brushes, charcoal, pencil, everything that's actually found in an artist studio you can find in this program. And so it's a digital version of analog work, basically. And because I travel a fair amount, or I was traveling a fair amount, I thought that was a tool I absolutely needed. So the next day I went to the Apple store in Berlin and I bought an iPad and got the software. And the rest is history. And I've been experimenting with painting, digital painting.
And this is something that's not talked about much, how technology can sometimes, an artist working in a certain style, but working in traditional media, when they go to something that is technological, a new technology, how it can alter their work. I don't think that's talked about a lot, but it seems to me it really inspired some very interesting work, but it does have a little bit of a different quality to it. There seems to be more line in it than some of the other paintings where you have more large fields of color there.
Yes, that's exactly right. But I do still think color is critical to the success, if I may say so, or to the appeal of this work.
Yeah. Well, it is very vivid colors too. Yeah. Is there? Do you choose the colors in the same way when you're using this technology as you do when you're painting?
No, it really happens differently. I think there's more emphasis put on the front end of drawing and gesture and dividing the space up in a particular way and then filling in. Now, this work was also an extension of some work that I was doing that was manual work in sketchbooks when I would travel to Europe. And I would be drawing divisions. I'd be drawing shapes and then filling in with color. So I was doing that by hand, if you will. And then this technology kind of replaced that and allowed me to take it to another level.
That's fascinating. Fascinating. I think this is going to be very interesting. I think the viewers who come to the exhibit are going to be fascinated by what a new technology, what it can mean for an artist, and how it can really inspire new directions.
Well, I think it also makes sense in terms of the fact that we're living in a world that has gone digital in so many ways that it never was, and so it's really a good companion to being able to work in an analog environment and do the actual paintings, and then switch over.
Now, one question. Since you've done this work now with the digital technology, has this in turn affected how you work in an analog, with more traditional paints and things? Or do you think of them as different things?
I do think of them as different things, and yet when I was getting ready for this exhibition, I thought about including this work, and first I thought, well, maybe the work is too different, and then the more I looked at it and the more I looked at my work, I see that there's a lot of correspondence and there are many characteristics that both kinds of work share. So it's different, but it's still in the ballpark of what I do.
Very interesting, very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for showing that. I'm very excited about seeing these in the exhibit. I want to thank you. This has been so nice to be able to have you show us around your studio, and we're so excited about this exhibit. I think this is going to be a great exhibit. I hope everyone can come down to the Westville Atheneum, visit the Rand Gallery, and see this exhibit that will continue through till the end of October.